Shemai, hello, my name's Simon Hobson, and today's guest is Kiera Marshall. After achieving in 2024 Plaid Cymru's best result in a general election in Cardiff, 26-year-old Kiera is seen as a rising star in Welsh politics. She hopes that this momentum will carry her into the Senedd of next year's Welsh elections. Having grown up on a council estate, faced the trauma of stalking, and now expecting a first child, Kiera is determined to represent those who often feel unheard in politics. Perhaps it is this drive which has also directed her career in developing public policy, particularly in community engagement and making economics work for everybody. Hi, Kiera. Good to have you on the podcast.
Thank you for having me.
So perhaps we could start at the beginning. Tell us a little bit about your childhood, where you're from, where you grew up, parents, anything you think people might like to hear.
So I was born in Swansea, and then we moved to Edinburgh when I was really young, and we lived in Edinburgh and Musselburgh for a few years before moving back to Swansea, where I started school. And then my parents split up when I was in primary school in about like 2007, 2008, as this is in the middle of the financial crash. And they were having to like remortgage and find another house. And my mum ended up then moving to Town Hill, which is the council estate I grew up in. Growing up there, sort of like a lot of stigma from being from there, and I came of age sort of in that wake of the financial crash and austerity in an area that was like completely ignored and forgotten. And yeah, I guess living there really shaped my politics and who I am today, because there was like a real sense of community and people, like everyone knew each other, but it was also like a really bleak situation that everyone was in, and opportunity was really poor. But it's quite interesting because my parents' situation now is very different to how it was growing up. So my mum was only working part-time, so she could look after me. And she worked in charities like Oxfam, Barnardo's, and my dad had tried to set up a tech business when I was younger that hadn't worked out, so he was trying to get back into employment. Whereas now my mum co-runs a research cooperative in Swansea, and my dad was recently made redundant last year, but stuff is like looking up for him a bit now as well. And even though my parents have like split up, they're very amicable. It's my birthday this next week, and we're going out on Saturday for a meal, and we all come together. And so even, you know, they split up, but I was never from like a broken home. I just had two homes, which is like quite a unique situation really. And yeah, I enjoyed school. I did well in school. I was very good at maths, which ultimately led to me studying economics and then pursuing the career I have. And then, yeah, I didn't get in trouble or anything like that at school, but I was for a while, like as a teenager, in like a more alternative sort of group, like emos, goths, whatever you call it. And we used to like lurk outside McDonald's in Swansea every Saturday. And yeah, that was quite embarrassing. But I enjoyed my childhood largely, but it very much shaped who I am today.
Yeah, it was the economic aspect of 2008. Was that something that put pressure on your parents' relationship? You mentioned that was around this split up, or was that coming anyway?
No, I think my parents didn't mean to have me, so that was like the relationship wasn't very like on great foundations. But I think that did. I think my dad's business didn't work out because of the financial crisis, and my mum was also doing a lot of the caring and working part-time, and they'd moved back from somewhere, because I don't think Edinburgh was working for them either. I think they were struggling there, so they had to come be back with family in Swansea. And I think like that did add to sort of the erosion of their relationship probably. But I think like the fallout from it as well, like they're having to find, I think like they did it in an interesting way where my dad ended up paying half my mum's, he remortgaged, paid half my mum's mortgage, and they shared both the mortgages. So I think that like the financial burden of that on my dad was really hard, from like conversations I've had with him afterwards, because they, you know, when there was two of them together, it was he was a lot better off essentially. And yeah, I think that, and I saw my mum struggle as well, you know. I think when she was living in Town Hill, like she'd not lived anywhere like that before. She'd lived in Reading in England growing up, and sort of her life took a different trajectory after the financial crisis as well. So I think, yeah, I did put a strain on them, but they pulled through.
And when you went to school, you went to school and didn't learn Welsh at school. So I've been reading that you've put quite a few years into getting a level of Welsh that you're happy with. And what's important about learning the Welsh language for you, and what does the language mean to you personally?
I find this really embarrassing reflecting on it, but I used to be like, there's, it's still out there, that sentiment, but I used to like really not care for the Welsh language, and I couldn't understand why I was having to learn it in school, and I'd go home to my mum and be like, I don't care about this, why are we learning it?
What was behind that animosity towards it?
I think I couldn't see the use for it. All my family they're all born in England, my whole family, so I didn't have it around me. And I think Swansea's very anglicised anyway. It's about 16%, I think, of people in Swansea speak Welsh. So it wasn't around me. And until I worked for Plaid, I'd never even been to North Wales. I'd not seen communities where it was used. So for me, it was like, it did feel like a dead language at that time, and I wasn't exposed. It wasn't taught to me in a way where it was like an immersion in my culture or my history. It was just taught to an exam I was being like forced to do. And it wasn't until I think I went to university in London and I got this really like this intense like homesickness, and people would ask me in London if I spoke Welsh, and they were interested in the fact I was Welsh, and I didn't, and that was like embarrassing to me, or like it made me feel less Welsh perhaps, and I don't sound Welsh to a lot of people as well. So I've always had like a weird sense of identity because, my family aren't Welsh, and I feel very Welsh, but perhaps other people wouldn't see me as that. And so when I did come back to Wales and I chose to be here and I started learning Welsh, it gave me like a sense of belonging, and like I connected with my home and with place in a way that wasn't through my family line. And it's been like quite an emotional journey learning Welsh, because at times I felt really frustrated that it was something that wasn't given to me, and I've had to put all this time and money and effort into learning it, and I'm still by no means very good at it. Like I can follow other people having a conversation, but I don't enjoy speaking it because I'm not very confident with it. But it's opened up so many doors, not just work opportunities, but like a whole genre of like music that I've never listened to, never even knew existed. Or I went to the first Eisteddfod I've ever been to last year. It came to Swansea when I was younger, and I didn't even know about it. I didn't even know it was there. And it's just like a whole part of my culture I now have access to, which has been like hard to get there, but it's really nice now I have it. And as you mentioned, I'm like pregnant with my first child, and my partner's first language Welsh, and like I can't wait to like raise her in like through the medium of Welsh, and for her to have access to that in a way that I didn't really.
Yeah, and of course it's a great skill for any child to be brought up in 2 or more languages. It puts them at an advantage in the world, which obviously personally I think many people in Wales don't necessarily appreciate that aspect of having that second language.
Yeah, and it's so much easier to learn another language if you are bilingual as a child as well, because I like my thought processes are so in English. Like it's really hard to pick up another language because the way I've learned to speak and grammar is so ingrained in the English language. I find it difficult to learn other languages. Like I'm terrible for when I go abroad, like not remembering like basic phrases, whereas my partner picks up like Italian, German, Spanish, like he can just remember it because he's bilingual like as a child. So it is an opportunity for young people to have it.
Yeah, absolutely. You mentioned you went to university in London. That was London School of Political Science and Economics. Is that the right around? LSE, yeah. I guess I used to using the acronyms, forget the full names. So, and you studied government and economics at university. So, did that process of studying was that really what made you start thinking, well, this isn't right, this seems to make sense, how do I apply this to the community, as you mentioned, that you're from and thrown into maybe harsher financial situation than you maybe expected as a child.
Mm.
Was it formative, or did you just get through it and think, well, I've done the degree now?
It was formative. Like the degree itself it gave me like good research skills that I've used in my job, but in terms of like the experience that I took away most from university, one of the most shocking things for me was the difference between me and the people that I went to university with. And LSE is this type of university that churns out like the future politicians or civil servants or whatever of the UK and the wider world. People go into very sort of high powered jobs from LSE. And these people were like getting private planes home to like Switzerland during the university holidays. Or like I was friends with like the son of like a diplomat. Both his parents were diplomats for like different areas. It was like a world completely different to when I went home during the summer holidays. And it like frustrated me how out of touch everyone was, and that these were people who were going to make policy for the majority of the population, who they have no idea what the population is going through. And I think that's what I really took away, and especially in my first year, I think that also entrenched like that feeling of homesickness I was getting, because it was this liberal bubble of wealth, and I'd go home and it was like during the time of the Brexit referendum, and there were UKIP signs everywhere and people were having a really hard time, and the contrast to me was really significant. And then it was also, my degree itself was like very UK English centric. So even like though it's a very international university, I remember studying voting systems, for example, and one of my lecturers said, oh, nowhere in the UK uses a proportional voting system. Meanwhile, I was voting that year in the Senedd elections where we were using a style of proportional representation. So it like reinforced to me this like sidelining of Wales. I also wanted to do my dissertation on how Brexit had impacted the Welsh independence movement. And I was told there wouldn't be enough to write about, and I'd have to do it about the like secessionist movements in Scotland, Northern Ireland, and in Wales, and how Brexit impacted them, which is way too big to write like an undergraduate dissertation on. But it's because these sort of London academics didn't know about the wider like devolution system, or like the depth of politics in Wales, because it's not covered. But yeah, I guess what it taught me is that the people, I don't want these people representing me or making my politics. I really, really believe that politics should be shaped by lived experience and the people that it impacts, rather than sort of a top-down approach.
It sounds like those lecturers and professors weren't even prepared to engage in the conversation to learn more themselves, which would suggest to me they're very bad lecturers and academics, because I thought the purpose was to widen their own knowledge. But did that make you frustrated at all with the learning process in universities?
Yeah, it did. And I think a lot of the education system like frustrates me, because I think it's like memorization and learning what someone else is telling you, and there's not enough like critical thinking, I think, behind these sort of things. It was very much, here's like a really established thinker, and you are very lucky to hear what they're going to say, and this is what they're telling you, and you have to sort of take that as it is, rather than sort of expanding like horizons and learning from each other. But I think it was also the type of university I went to maybe was not like, that's maybe a problem with these higher what do you call them,
the tier one universities, as it were. But I understand that the government of Wales has started to introduce a new curriculum for schools, which is supposedly trying to focus towards teaching children how to develop more of those critical thinking skills and how to engage with the world, so that they can go off and adapt and teach themselves as they go through life. What's your view on that particular process and that educational system?
I am hopeful for the like new curriculum in Wales. I'll agree with like the principle of it, and teaching people outside of exam, like not teaching to exams, instead teaching people, you know, wider life experience and the tools they need to get through life. But I worry about the actual practical, like how it's being implemented and the resources that, you know, the pressure that teachers are under at the minute, for example, and how they're going to be taught to implement this new curriculum when there's already like a shortage of teachers. And are we actually going to see the benefits of a new curriculum if we don't match it with the resource necessary, or if we even have the resource necessary for it to work? I think that's my problem. And we also have, you know, it will need the retraining of some teachers essentially as well, because if you've been teaching for like 40 years in a different style, it's going to be really hard to adapt that. And if you, for example, do your teaching degree in England and then you come to teach the curriculum in Wales, again, it's a different style of learning that you're being asked to implement. And are we giving teachers what they need to make that a success, is what I'm concerned about.
And would you take it in any other direction? Have you got particular insight or interests in how you would personally shape the educational system?
That's an interesting question. I've not so much thought about it in terms of the sort of school years necessarily, in the fact that I'm happy with the principles of the new curriculum. But when it comes to college and higher education, I've thought about this a lot, because I did a year in a sixth form, and then I almost failed all my A levels. Like, I didn't do very well. And then I went to a college, and my experience there was totally different. And it was I think it was it felt more like I was given more responsibility over my own learning, and I had so much more options available to me to study, and I actually managed to pick stuff that I was interested in. And I really think that I worry that we retain young people in sixth forms because the school gets funding to keep people in sixth forms, even if that's not the best option to them. And we need to be looking at providing people with more courses available to them, and especially, you know, that should involve vocational courses. I think we push people into universities who don't maybe necessarily need to be there. And again, I think that's partly because of the marketisation of universities. It's become profitable to get people into universities rather than perhaps a different career path that would get them to the same place, and then they wouldn't be burdened with thousands of pounds of debt at the end of it. So I think the progression throughout our education system is something I would like to change. And yeah, I've got the sixth forms issue is difficult though, because sixth forms are really important in Welsh language communities, because the colleges often don't operate in Welsh. So unless we tackle that, then my issue with how I think sixth forms work doesn't completely sit right. But yeah, I think higher and further education is where I have more of an interest.
And what are your thoughts on the situation with Senedd children, and how they're approached, and the need for more funding? There, obviously, every part of education desperately needs more funding. But speaking as someone that went through school as quite severe dyslexia,
Okay.
and other issues, it certainly marked my life, and it's something that with my son, I see, and I have a interest in your view on that.
Yeah, my mum used to work with young people who had additional learning needs, and she always spoke to me about how we shouldn't have separate learning streams for people who have additional learning needs, and that it segregates them from other their peers essentially, and that we should be trying to teach people in the classroom and have more classroom resource to do that. But whether that's overly idealistic in the next Senedd term, the term after that, to actually be able to have that resource, I don't know. But I think there is something there about not isolating people who have disabilities in the education system, because then it happens in employment and it happens in later life and other areas as well, doesn't it? But yeah, I'm not entirely sure. It's not an area I've really looked into, apart from just having a passing conversation with my mum, because she does a lot of disability activism. Yeah.
So when you were at university, the Senedd brought in a new law allowing 16 and 17-year-olds to vote in Welsh elections. And you've spent a lot of time working really hard to engage younger people in community politics and politics within the nation of Wales. I wonder if there isn't a risk of engaging young people, in quotation marks, just becoming a buzzword. And what would you like to see as a concentration of powers that the next generation accumulates or is given?
I think, to be honest, I think you're right. I think it is a buzzword. I think, turnout in the 16 to 18 age group in the last Senedd elections, and then the wider, up into my age group as well, is low, very low compared to the rest of the population. But I think when you've got 50-year-old politicians across the UK telling you to be excited and get involved with politics as a young person, and then betraying you or actively depressing the opportunities and the basic sort of hopes you might have in life, it doesn't exactly encourage you to perhaps want to get involved with that. So my motivation as a young person in politics has been to sort of lead by doing, if they're not going to do it for us, and I think about one of the core memories of as I was growing up, and one of my first political memories is the tuition fees scandal and the Liberal Democrats and that. I remember telling my dad to go and vote Lib Dem just before that election. So that was like one of the first things I really remember. And it's just the constant betrayal of young people and what we'll be able to achieve. And I think I want to just be in these rooms asking, what about young people? How does this impact young people? Why haven't we got like a young person's travel pass, but we have an older person's travel pass when young people can't drive and they're not entitled to the full minimum wage as older people are, yet they're having to sort of struggle, to have these like unique struggles that are ignored. And what I've also been trying to do is create like a network of young people in Cardiff. I've been trying to do this where it's just we meet up socially. It's for Plaid members or people who are interested in Plaid policies. They don't have to be members, to just talk about politics, and then potentially do leafleting together where they're not alone, or come to committee meetings where they're not alone. Because for a lot of people, if you're 20, you'll never have sat in a room with 40, 50-year-olds discussing for 2 hours politics. Like, you'll never have done that before. And actually knowing that other young people are going to be there might actually make you want to go, or might give you that confidence to go, even if you don't say anything the first time. And so because I used to go to Plaid meetings in Swansea West, and I was by far the youngest person there, and I'd sit there and I wouldn't say anything, and I'd have all these thoughts and I wouldn't say them. And I think if I'd had other people there with me who were probably having similar thoughts and similar questions as to why we were doing certain things, or not leafleting in certain areas and targeting others, or any little thing like that, it might have kept me more involved in politics at that age. But I think in terms of like the concrete powers I'd like to see, I think there's the political power and the political voice. I'd like to see political education on the curriculum. I worry a lot about the next Senedd election and the understanding not just young people have, but everyone will have, of the voting system. I've tried to explain it to like my mum and my mum's friends who are politically aware, and they don't get it, they don't understand it, they don't know it's coming in. So we're going to have a generation of young people where this is going to be the first election they vote in, and then next time it might change again, and it's going to be different in the general election, and that's confusing, I think, to people. And it's reasons like that I think we need political education on the curriculum. But I want them to have like political power in the terms of like politicians that are accountable for misleading them, for lying to them, and so on. I think Adam Price has been pushing stuff like that, to give them that sort of power back. But then ultimately what I want is young people to have economic power. I think we've seen like a generational shift, or my generation, the generation below, and even people who are a bit older than me, 35, that group of younger people have had less and less wealth and less opportunity. And I want to see that economic power given back, whether that's the wealth tax or a more progressive tax system, or the ability to own your own home, job opportunities where you actually live, that sort of thing is, to me, the priority, the material circumstance of young people.
Let's talk a little about economics and some of your ideas and policies, and how we shape Wales economically in the future. There, at the moment, the way economics works is there might be a policy that's good for the United Kingdom or good for Wales, but leave specific communities behind. And how does one reconcile that?
I think like what I'm motivated by and where my economics comes from is like inequality. So when we're looking at a policy and who it's good for, and if it's on aggregate good for Wales, but then there's certain people who are left behind by that, is who is winning and losing in this situation. Because I feel like so often with policy decisions we're seeing now, it's the people who have the least and who are at the bottom who lose from these decisions, whereas wealthy companies and wealthy people aren't having to sacrifice anything. I think of Tata, for example. In the name of net zero, we've lost thousands of jobs down in Port Talbot. But meanwhile, we're still going to be importing unclean steel from elsewhere, from places with poor human rights records. And we just nationalised steel in Scunthorpe, right? So there's a trade-off between net zero and an industry. But had we nationalised Port Talbot ourselves, had we had the borrowing powers or the political will to do so, we could have retained these workers while building the electric arc furnace, reskilled the people who were already there so they didn't have to leave the communities, so that impact of unemployment isn't on that community. But we're just not willing to do that, and instead we're going to have a massive economic hit. I think the issue of pylons as well and green energy is, it's something that is needed, but they're going to put these pylons across our rural communities, and what do they get in return? Some international company gets a lot of wealth from green energy. Meanwhile, our communities deal with the burden of that and the site that they don't want to see, in return for maybe like this company paying for their local rugby kit. And I just think that's wrong. I think it should be community owned and community wealth. And once again, it's the people at the bottom losing out from these decisions. I think with net zero, what we really need is a just transition, and that has to be in every policy we do as we move towards green industry. That has to be an underlying principle, is how do we replace polluting industries with opportunities in other areas. And that just isn't happening at all right now. And I don't think it's inevitable that communities will be left behind. I think the UK system has just made some communities expendable. That's just what we've allowed to happen. I think, another one I'm worried about is the growth of AI, and we're going to see gains in productivity, which for me, that those gains in productivity should release the worker of a burden. We could move towards different working patterns, or look at better pay for workers from that productivity gain. But I think what's going to happen is workers are going to lose jobs and lose hours, because AI is going to take on that work, and economic gains are going to be made by the company owners and the businesses and so on. And it's that inequality in policy that I think is actually the issue, rather than the policies themselves sometimes, if that makes sense.
Absolutely. And with my hat as a mining engineer, one of the things that frustrates me about net zero and some of the things that you've just spoken about is you get the CO2 and pollutant leakage. So buy vast amounts of gas from Qatar, just passing the CO2 on production elsewhere, you're shipping across vast amounts of ocean. And at the same time, there's a moratorium on not doing any fracking or hydrocarbons in Wales, which is a point that doesn't seem to be discussed when it comes to energy security and creating jobs and wealth in communities. And I'm interested also, you mentioned a little bit about the energy sector in Wales, and obviously that's something, as far as the electricity is concerned, which Wales does very well, but doesn't retain control over. It's in the hands of the private companies. So have you had any thoughts about whether and how Wales could have a sovereign wealth fund and to take that wealth? Obviously, within the political structure at the moment, it's not possible to do that. But is that something you've thought about, an aspiration, and is there a path towards achieving that?
Yeah, I think in the short term, within like this sort of Senedd term, I think like there should be an emphasis on like community energy and small scale community owned energy and increasing that. But I think in the larger term, or in an independent Wales, I would like to see energy ultimately nationalised. I would like to see like us owning that, and I think the benefits of that aren't just that we can look at like having clean energy and offshore wind and so on, and making sure that energy bills are cheaper in areas that are affected by things like pylons, but I think like being able to like train people up into the jobs as well, knowing what is coming up, knowing that the skills input we're going to need is something like we don't currently do. We don't have a pathway for that, whereas if we had sort of nationalized energy, we know what we're wanting to create, and it's all like government run. And then I also I just think like when I look at the energy crisis that's happened recently, cost of living and energy bills going up and energy companies making like record profits, like that just isn't going to happen. Meanwhile, people can't afford to heat their homes if we actually take control over our own energy and it's not run for profit. That whole year and that the trauma that people have gone through from that just would never happen in a different system. But that it's far away to get to there, and I think what can we do in the sort of shorter term to dampen some of the struggles people have with energy and move towards cleaner energy as well. But it's less exciting really. It's more like tinkering, and like I think people are frustrated with the lack of tangible change, and this like everything just that comes out of the Senedd sometimes feels like tinkering around the edges rather than actually implementing policy that's going to radically change things for people.
Yeah, and speaking from an economics point of view, as you sort of alluded to there, is there a danger that trying to help everybody ends up helping no one in particular? The economic powers that Wales needs to help everyone aren't there. So how would you go about furthering that?
Yeah, I think the premise that maybe is like, I don't know right now if I believe that they are trying to help everyone. I don't know if that is what I see coming out of like the Welsh government currently or the UK government. I think like I don't necessarily believe that like I think there can be an economy that works more for everyone. I don't think that's what we're doing currently, but the powers we need to do this in Wales, if we're talking about an economy that works for everyone in Wales, is for me control over our own tax system, which we don't currently have. We have some amount of tax raising powers, but they're essentially unusable because we can't change the bands within them. So we can't really target high income earners. The band for the top earners that we have in Wales is so broad that we'd be bringing in too many people who aren't really high earners into that, and also we don't quite have enough of like the top high earners to make that worthwhile. And then I also think like breaking up the lower ends of the bands is important as well to try and create that more progressive tax system, and make sure like the people who have the most are paying the most. And I don't think that's what the UK is doing, and I don't think the powers we have currently are enough to actually do that effectively. And then I also need control over our own borrowing powers. I think the Senedd has like some sort of budget at the minute. I think it's like 500 million a year or something like that they can borrow, which is not enough, I believe, to counter the cumulative impact of like a decade and a half of austerity and the underinvestment of Wales historically. I think we have to look at borrowing to invest in, whether that's our railways or large green infrastructure projects. And stuff like that, I think is what we need those borrowing powers for. Where essentially, even though we have this, the Senedd is like such a frustrating system, because even though we have control over these certain things, actually without borrowing powers and without control over our own finances, we are still just recreating like an England budget in Wales. And if we don't believe in the austerity that's being implemented in England, or we don't believe in how investment is currently working in England, then it doesn't work for Wales. Like, it doesn't work for the Wales we're trying to create in this devolved system. I think another economic power you have, we sort of mentioned it, is control over our own land, the Crown Estate. If we controlled that, we could look at increasing the value of it, like they've done in Scotland, trying to scale up that sort of investment. And then something else in the energy market as well that we don't have power over is they're splitting it up at the minute. I think it's called like REMA, and they're going to attach North Wales to some of North England and South Wales to some of the south of England, which essentially means that like energy prices, even though we produce so much energy prices in Wales are going to be more expensive to subsidise bills in England than if we paired up North and South Wales. And we're also like destroying the territorial like integrity of Wales by doing so. Like, why? They would never split up Scotland like that. So why is it fine to do it to Wales? And ultimately, it means bills will be more expensive for people in South Wales than if we were one energy market. And it will make it harder for people who want independence and who want devolution of the Crown Estate and stuff like that, for example, when you don't have Wales as one unit. And I think the cynic in me thinks it's purposeful, but I don't know that for sure. Yeah, so those are the sort of tangible powers I think that would make it better for, by everyone. It's the majority who aren't benefiting at the minute by current economic policy. Currently, there's a minority who are benefiting.
Yeah, you still have the intent to stand to get into the Senedd next year, and you know there's some that I've spoken to on this pod and just in life in general that might argue that the Senedd, for some of the reasons you've mentioned, is a chamber hamstrung by dysfunctional devolutionary settlement, and you know it's built on a premise of unfair treatment for Wales and its people. So in seeking election to the Senedd, are you in fact entrenching that dysfunctionality?
It's such a good question, because I agree. I think the Senedd doesn't work how a parliament should work, but the Senedd is not what I would have picked to happen. Like, I believe that we should be in an independent Wales with our own parliament, whereas this is the system we're given, and I believe it's better than if we were just governed by Westminster and we weren't, you know, our voice is completely drowned out when we're, you know, 85% of the electorate live in England, sort of thing. And if that's where our lawmaking power is, we're completely unheard. And people fought really hard to get our Senedd, and it is better, but it doesn't work how a functioning parliament should work in a country that governs itself. And it's endlessly frustrating. Like, I work in the Senedd and I see it all the time, like that this is true. But then, you know, I also ran for Westminster, and I don't agree that should be there. Or I don't believe in, you know, how Westminster works at all. But I believe that if this is, you know, this is the system in which I'm living within, and my children will live within, my neighbours live within, and if I can try and make it work better, then I will. But at the same time, like, I'm not going to stop fighting for ultimately what I believe Wales should look like, which is independence and our own proper parliament that has tax powers and borrowing powers and can actually improve the lives of people more tangibly. But, you know, I'm happy to try and work in the meantime with what I've got available to me. And I think that's where a lot of people come from, you know, especially from sort of my side of the political spectrum, is that it's sort of circumstantial, really.
Let's go continuing those thoughts. There's, you know, if one can look across the Atlantic to Quebec, that works. Okay, there's a bit more of a structured federalized system in Canada, but Quebec is recognized as a nation within the Canadian Federation. It works within a Westminster style structure, and it has managed to accumulate a great deal of economic and political decision-making powers. It has control over its own immigration, and many other things. Why do you think the citizens of Wales are so, let's say, fair and disengaged with the whole political process, and why have they failed generally over the course of history to push back at Westminster?
I think on the topic of Quebec, I was talking to someone about this the other day, and she mentioned the fact that they have like a written constitution, and that helps because the government of Canada can't turn around and be like, we're going to do this in your devolved area, because it's there in plain writing, like you can't do it. Whereas here, it's there's parliamentary sovereignty, and ultimately they can do whatever.
So is that something that you would advocate for, having a Bill of Rights effectively for the citizens of Wales?
Yeah, I think so. I do think our constitution is like, I think we need more checks and balances. I think the idea of like parliamentary sovereignty as like the top, like the highest thing is not necessarily great, and it disenfranchises citizens and the so on. But I don't think I believe in that, but I don't think that's what's at the root of the problem here. Essentially, is that I think politics hasn't worked for people in Wales for years, and I think that disenfranchises people. And I think when you're worried about the day to day, you would and whether all these different governments, all these different layers of governments, all these different parties haven't delivered change for you, and in fact things are only getting worse, I think that disenfranchises people with the political system. And I think about when I recently helped out in the by-election in Splot in Cardiff, and it's quite like a poor area in Splot, and the level of not interested, don't want to talk to you on the doors, not going to vote, or voting like a reform or sort of maybe a more protest style party is very different to if you walk around Pontcanna or Canton. People are really happy to engage in politics with you because it's working for them, like their lives are positive and looking up. So I think what I'd like to see and why I'm in politics is that I want to try and make the Senedd deliver for people, so that they, like, even if it's slight improvements, so that they then begin to have faith in the political system again. And then I also think, like, if we improve their material circumstances and if we improve the Welsh economy, that will give people faith in Welsh independence, because they've seen the Welsh government working for them, and they've seen these improvements. But I think until we deliver that, we're just going to be looking at apathy and people not having faith in Wales as a nation. And I think the current Welsh government are just so stale in that sense, that it's sort of allowed this apathy to happen almost.
So one of the things about New Wales, sort of a primary driver of why it was set up, was to establish and ask questions that aren't being asked in Wales, and find innovative answers to the questions that are usually asked. So I guess my question to you is, if you were to pick between maintaining your personal political capital or truly upsetting the status quo, as we sort of just touched upon a bit there, with in favour of a better Wales, which would you choose? And have you got any examples of having done so in the past?
This is a good question, and someone asked me something similar to this in the general election. It was slightly different, but they asked, like, if they're basically asking, like, what would you break party whip for? Like, what do you sort of truly believe in? And then my answer then to them was sort of international issues like conflicts and wars, and then human rights issues. That's like gay marriage or women's rights, abortion rights, stuff like that, like stuff that's really close and personal to me. Even like workers' rights comes into that and stuff as well. But then I guess in like the context here, like I've not yet had to be in this situation, like specifically, where I've had to choose between maintaining my political capital, like upsetting the status quo. So I can't give an exact example, but I guess like one thing that perhaps I'd say was that, like, when I was at LSE, And I met someone through like circles in London, and he's a bit older, and he ran a financial services company essentially. And he told me very like explicitly that he would never employ someone like me. He'd never employ me because of how outspoken I'd been with my political views and what I believed in. So I think, you know, I've never hidden my views or like changed what I think because it's comfortable or potentially in that situation would get me a job. I liked, you know, what drives me is my views and my principles. So I hope that I wouldn't ever like falter on those, but I've not been tested on that fully. So
but just to unpick that a little bit, that is almost deference to somebody that may be seen as having more social capital, with the example you gave there at university. Is that something you think that a lot of people in Wales see? They don't see themselves worth, you know, their value is not in their opinions and their lived experience, and therefore they do kowtow to somebody from Westminster, or, you know, a politician that says, no, I know better than you, you just get on with your life. And if you believe that is the case, I mean, how do you break that cycle of, because that's in somebody's psyche and ingrained in families and generations?
Yeah, I think that is in the national psyche, to be honest. I think there's a really like undervaluing of self in Wales. But I was speaking to a young person the other day who was also thinking about running for Plaid in the Senedd elections, and they messaged me, and they were filling out the application process, and it asks you about your job experience, and they said, oh, I don't really have any like political job experience apart from like this one, you know, work experience thing they've done. And I was like, oh no, it's not just your political experience. I was like, it's any work experience you've done, like your career. And they were like, oh, so I can put hospitality on there. And I was like, yeah, you should definitely put hospitality. Like in chronological order, just put any experience that you have of work. And like it dawned on me that like they didn't see the value in, you know, having worked in the hospitality industry their whole life as something that a political party might want or value or find of importance. And
right, in fact, actually, it shows that you can communicate with people and interact with people, and exactly what politicians are often very bad at.
And you've worked in like a really struggling sector as well, and you've been on a minimum wage job, and you've had to talk to the general public in like a normal way, and like I think you know, that's just one small example of I think what's probably happening all over Wales, as you mentioned. It's in the national psyche, and we're taught that we're lesser, or, you know, not. It's elitism. It's like the British class elite system, I think, as well, is like part of it. But yeah, I do think that exists. I don't know what the counter to that, again, I think it's just like leading by doing, like getting people who are just like normal people into positions of power, into policy making powers, into their communities, like lifting up community activists, not like from the ground, and creating politicians out of them rather than putting politicians in communities. Like that's the level of what we need to be doing. I thinking like the fact we have like families in Wales who have been Senedd members and people in high up lobbying positions who are partners with politicians, like it's elitism, and we need to bring people up who actually understand what is going on and aren't just in these political circles.
So to conclude on my questions, if in an idealized scenario, where would you like Wales to be as a nation and citizens of Wales to think and feel in 15 years' time?
15 years. I think like I'm not going to be idealist about it and say that I think that it will be in an independent Wales. I think we should like really carefully carve a pathway out to independence, and what I'd like to see over the next 15 years is actually like economic prosperity and the changing of people's economic fates. I'd like to see no child poverty in 15 years. I don't think any child should be like hungry or cold, like as a very basic level. And I think like, you know, that alongside that would be like job opportunities for people, which again is so basic. But I just think that like really basic level of like economic, like material needs being met for people is what I'd like to see in 15 years. And I think that puts in the foundations for then the wider things I'd like to see being achieved after 15 years, like independence, like creating a constitution that's perhaps written, like creating a nation state once we have the people's basic needs being met in 15 years is, I think, yeah, I'd love to say that like in 15 years I'd see Wales like as independent, and that, you know, that is where I would be, but I just can't. I just can't. We're so far from where we need to be, and in the support we have from people, and but also people's lives. I think that has to be the priority first for me.
I said that was my last question, but actually your answer's given me another thought, and I'm interested to know why you believe independence is the right path for the nation of Wales.
I think like it's so multifaceted, right? But I'll try and like summarize it. I think if there's 3 different prongs to it for me, and I'll start like politics is one, right? We vote differently to the UK, and we don't get to see the tangible impact of that. No, we could all, the entirety of Wales could vote the Green Party or Plaid, and it would have no impact on Westminster. There would still be a completely different government there should England vote a different way.
But couldn't that be changed just by changing to a single transferable vote or another more democratic proportional system where you would end up with a coalition, and then you may get, in your example, the Green in Westminster?
I don't know if it would, because like again, 85% of the electorate lives in England, and then you've got even more than Wales and Scotland. Like we're still proportionally like so small that even if you change your proportional system, unless you manage to get that coalition of thought across the UK, I just don't see how our voice will be heard if our voice is different. And I do believe our voice is different. I do believe people in Wales think differently and have different political thought. And then I think the political system also is then unfair in the fact that like we, you know, I'll take like just a really classic example of like rail infrastructure, for example. Like we're paying into projects that we don't get to see the result of. The Crown Estate, stuff like that. It's devolved in Scotland. It's not devolved here. Like there's foundational unfairness in the political system. So that's like one of the sort of prongs for me. And then I think like culture is another one. I think like I worry about how you can protect like the Welsh language and Welsh identity as in the current system. And I guess again you could say like you could look at potentially like federalism or other ideas to protect that, but I don't see anyone offering this. I don't see the drive for it in England, and I don't see anyone in the other UK nations wanting that, wanting a different system where the UK is still one. It's not on the cards, and I, you know, I do believe that Wales is its own country and its own nation, and that it should self-govern as like an emotional principle to me. That's and I guess that ties into culture. And then I think it's economics as well. The you know, the tax raising powers, the borrowing powers, the historic underinvestment.
Of course, the economics is something that a unionist would throw back at you and say, well, Wales can't do this on its own because it needs our handouts from Westminster and London and England.
But I just think, like, you know, they often say that, yeah, this sort of thing, and we're too poor to, you know, if we're independent, we'd be some sort of lower level ranking in wealth, GDP of countries, and right now we're a higher one. But it's like, well, no, because right now, like, we're still as poor as we are as part of the UK. Like, we are not. You're saying, oh, you're too poor to leave, but that this level of poverty, this level of poorness, is the starting point you've given us. Like, we don't have the resources to change that. You are not changing it. Therefore, like, how can we afford not to? How can we afford to continue in this union? I don't like. I really struggle with that argument, because it's like, you're too poor as part of the union. Like, it doesn't logically like work for me. But that, yeah, I think. But again, this is why my whole like focus is on economics so much, is because I do believe that's clearly a concern for people. And economics, changes how people have managed to enjoy their lives. So until we fix that, until we give people hope that we're not too poor and that stuff can work for them, then we're not going to get people on board with independence, I don't think.
Thank
Even
you.
if they don't believe it.
Yeah. So just to conclude then, have you plans for the next few months? Are you doing things? Are people going to see you around? Obviously, I imagine you're going to be out campaigning, but any other activities?
Currently, I'm running in the internal selections at the minute in Cardiff, to be like a Plaid Cymru Senedd member on the list, hoping to get to the top of the list. And then I'm also going to be speaking at the Barry March for Independence on the 26th of April as well, which should be really nice. I've never spoke, it's going to be thousands of people, I've never spoken at anything that sort of scale before, but I'm looking forward to that. And then I think that's the only two things I've got coming up really, but I'm going to be, internal selections finishes by mid-May, and then I'll be campaigning the whole year then, basically, just getting ready for the Senedd elections and
busy time for you.
Yeah, getting the campaign going, and then having a child in the middle of that somewhere as well.
So of course, just a side thing.
Yeah. So I will have a break somewhere in August. That's my plan. But campaigning and hopefully getting these really exciting Senedd elections ahead and actually getting that change in place for people, and hopefully we'll see a different government in 2026.
Okay, Kiera Marshall, thank you very much for being today's guest. Really appreciate it. All the best.
Thanks.
If you enjoyed this episode, be sure to subscribe and stay tuned for more conversations with people who want to build the future of Wales. And do go and find, like and enjoy new.wales across all your favourite social media channels.